Hi folks, my name is Tim Savage and I'm the immediate past president of the Orchestra of Northern New York. Today on Behind the Scenes of ONNY, a very special guest, our music director, Mr. Kenneth Andrews. Ken, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, earliest musical memories, teachers and other personalities who played a significant role in your development and in your decision to pursue a path in music?
Sure. I sort of lived all over because my father, his work took him quite a ways. And I was born in Delaware and lived for a few years in South Carolina, and then moved in second grade to Chicago, where I grew up, went to school, and did all my studies until my parents left. My father left for the University of Texas at Dallas, and my sophomore year at Indiana. So I spent all the really formative years in the Chicago area. And we actually have some other members of the orchestra that were there. And some people would find it interesting that John Ellis, who was our principal trumpet and, for all these years, his father was my principal in high school.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and for both my brothers. So there's a lot of history in the orchestra of people, Jim Medea as well, who's from there. As far as memories go, when I was very young, I started piano in first grade and added flute to it in fourth grade. But actually before that, I come from a very musical family. My father was a wonderful pianist, and both my brothers played. So I remember, even when I was very young, before piano, listening to them perform and play every night. They would play. And my grandfather was a world-renowned biochemist, research biochemist, but what I remember is not that. I remember his viola playing. And he played in the North Carolina Symphony and actually donated his checks back to the North Carolina Symphony. So all I remember him as this great musician that I emulated and later played with as I got older.
So both your grandfather and your father were very musical, but didn't pursue musical careers?
No, not musical careers. And my father was a wonderful organist and pianist, and but we would sight read together, sometimes 1, 2, or 3 hours a night, every night. Mostly string literature. I would transcribe different pieces, or practice my transposing with viola pieces and stuff. Or my brothers would play, and we played ensembles, and pretty much every evening that was that. And then I would go to sleep to my brother practicing piano
what a
every
rich
night.
environment.
So it was, it was really a great family experience. My mother was amazing. She was not a musician, didn't have a musical bone in her body, but she made everything happen, and was a really wonderful listener. And my parents actually, in later years with ONNY, came over until my father passed away in 1996, would come over and help ONNY move. He would come over and help he'd said some of the moving and everything else.
Cool.
My high school years were very full because there's so much going on in Chicago. I did a lot of different things. Always, every year for 4 years, took the train every Saturday into Chicago and had my lesson in the Chicago Symphony Youth Orchestra. I think the most special part of my high school years was during my senior year, I composed a musical that gathered in about, on today's standard, if you're looking at inflation, about $70,000, 4 performances that raised money for their youth group. I wrote the musical and selected the pit orchestra and conducted it, and it was
as a senior in high school.
Right, did that. And I also created a chamber orchestra in Chicago and auditioned students from all over the Chicagoland area my senior year, and then conducted these concerts around Chicago.
How long have we known each other? It's got to be going on 30 years. I had never heard that story before. Yeah. That's neat.
Well, I had 30 students, private students, both my junior and senior year in high school, $2 a half hour. And and then also, as I said, did a lot of musical things in Chicago and that, but it was very good. When I studied at Indiana, which I was very blessed to be able to work with James Pellerite and Harry Howdeshel, it was a great experience. At that time, Indiana and Juilliard sort of were the two schools putting people into major orchestras. And I think what was most special about it for me was my senior year. I won the audition for the Montreal Symphony when I was a senior at Indiana, and they flew me back and forth between Bloomington and Montreal to complete to play concerts. They were upset that I could not just drop what I was doing. But Indiana had offered me an incredible opportunity to teach the performance majors of my own teacher, James Pellerite, former principal with the Philadelphia Orchestra, while he was on sabbatical that spring semester.
And you were a senior.
I was a senior, and so they offered me this opportunity, and I told
Wow.
the Montreal Symphony, I can't just, I said I couldn't do this. Actually, I told the personnel manager, I said, you wouldn't want me to do this to you, so I'm not doing this to them. And they begrudgingly agreed to do it, so I flew back and forth.
How long were you with Montreal?
I was in Montreal about 3 or 4 years.
Nice.
And
That was a full-time schedule?
Oh yeah, yeah, 52 weeks season, and we did a lot of children's concerts. When we did children's concerts, we did 10 a week, and 7 of them were in French and 3 were in English. Oh my gosh. And we'd do 2 a day, and that was your schedule for that week.
In school concerts? Or?
In school concerts. No, these are actually, the students were brought to the hall.
Okay, I was going to say that's a lot of lugging and tugging. If
right, no, these are all done
What
there.
a great experience for the students to come to a concert hall. What was the venue for the Montreal Symphony Orchestra?
Salle Wilfrid Pelletier, which is still there. It's still the home of the Montreal Symphony. And it's a plaza like, very much like Lincoln Center. There's a theater, there's another hall for opera, and different venues, plus the Contemporary Museum of Art. It's very similar to Lincoln Center.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So what after Montreal?
Well, after Montreal, I decided I wanted a break from what I was doing. The stress in orchestral playing is quite high, and I just wanted to stress. And my teacher said, you know, there's a job open. He said, I hope you're not going to get out for very long, which I had planned on leaving just for a year or 2 and then doing something else. And he said, but Ohio University has an opening. Why don't you try that for a year and then get back? And so I taught at Ohio University School of Music. What I thought would be 2 years turned into 10. And
as the flute professor?
As a flute professor, and I also was asked to take over the symphony orchestra there. So I took that over in my last 2-3 years for them. But what was great about it was each summer I would be a guest artist. I was a guest artist on flute at Indiana University, and they had a festival orchestra. So a lot of major conductors conducted this, and some of my greatest, the people that I admired, were the principals from all the orchestras in the United States. So I was playing principal flute, and one of the greatest concertmasters of all time was concertmaster, and the principal oboe was from Boston Symphony, bassoonist from Chicago Symphony. It was quite amazing.
Wow.
And I taught that summer with Kent Terry, those summers, who was, for 40 years, was in the Philadelphia Orchestra. So it was quite an interesting time.
Again, another rich environment for you to be immersed in.
It really was. And the summers I usually would just go to one place or another to do as a guest artist or to teach. And then when Crane came open, actually I auditioned for the Crane School of Music and decided not to do it 1 year.
When was this?
This would have been in 1985.
I see.
And then they called me back in 1986. The person who had come in for 1 year left, and wonderful player and wonderful teacher, but just it wasn't for them, and they left, and they called back and said, reconsider. So I looked at it again, came up and auditioned, and I thought, I'll be here 2 or 3 years, and then was going to go back into orchestral playing or do a doctorate in conducting, one of the two. And somehow the 2 or 3 years has turned now into 33. I'm not sure how that happens, but it happens. You know. So that's sort of where it went. And you asked me about teachers. I have to say, my oldest brother was one of my first teachers, and I had private lessons starting in about 4th, 5th grade. A woman would come to our house. She would go to people's houses, and that family would take them to the next. And then I studied with Emil Eck, who was in the Chicago Symphony from 1918 to 1954, one of the great masters of the instrument. And then studied with Dick Graff, who was, until last year, I think, the associate principal flute with the Chicago Symphony. And then worked with some others along the way. But perhaps I have to say that the greatest people that I think of are my parents, because if it weren't for my mom And what we always say to young people when we have our young artist competitions, if it weren't for the parents taking the kids to the lessons and all of this, it wouldn't happen. But I do have to recount to you quickly that in 4th grade, I actually didn't want to play flute. I cannot believe I'm going to admit this, but I wanted to play clarinet. I don't know what possessed me, but I wanted to play clarinet, and I was told that because I had a cap that I had broken in gym class, a cap on the front tooth, that wasn't good for clarinet playing. And I told my parents I was not going to play any sissy instrument like the flute, and that, you know, and do that. And my father said, well, but your brother plays flute, and he's on the gymnastic team. Do you think? I said, yeah. And he said, and at that time, all the orchestras had men in the sections. Now, of course, it's equal, or they're held by women. But at that time, in the in the 60s, it was kind of a male bastion situation. Yeah. And so I ran upstairs, threw myself in the bed, and cried because I didn't want to do this. But I ended up deciding to do it, and I went upstairs and locked myself in the room for virtually 3 days and learned, and that was it.
Somehow I'm not surprised that you did it that way.